a different perspective of it to the DSM, which is what clinical psychology use as well. However, when I was looking it up in the clinical side of things, I looked up the DSM, which is what psychologists use to diagnose anxiety disorder. And it was very similar in the symptoms that I talk about. And it talks about having the symptoms for 6 months or so. So I think they have like a little questionnaire when you go see a psychologist. They'll have a questionnaire around anxiety. They ask you these questions, and then they may diagnose you with an anxiety disorder. Now, I have a different perspective because I'm coming from more of a holistic point of view. So I look at it more as a symptom of something underlying. There's something underneath that's always a signal telling us some information. What happens is our mind gets in the way of the information, depending on how we view a situation, an environment, or people around us. And this will start to make sense as I move further into this talk. If you've got any questions along the way, pop them in the chat box, and then I can come back to them as well. So this is called polyvagal theory, autonomic nervous system. Now, the reference here is Deb Dana, who does a lot of work on here. They're big words. We don't really need to worry about too much about the big words there. Why it's on a ladder is because our nervous system automatically responds to cues of safety or cues of danger. And it happens first from, you might be all calm and relaxed, then you get some news, or you see someone that you're not particularly fond of, or maybe you are told that you need to get up and do some public speaking, and then you find yourself in the sympathetic activation of fight flight. That is where anxiety lives, in that sympathetic area. That is why I've got it empty there, because we will be discussing that further. And underneath anxiety, if we went further down the ladder, that's where burnout lives, depression, shutdown, freeze response. Today, we're talking about fight or flight, and I'll speak about shutdown response after that. But fight or flight is a place where people can get to through burnout because they're in fight or flight. So you might have like, you might be a workaholic and you just work, do all these jobs, but you're not taking care of yourself. And then you go into burnout, which is the shutdown response. So the anxiety is more mobilizing because you're on the go. You've got lots of energy and you're kind of constantly moving in that space. It's either fight or flight. So we have this naturally, instinctively, innately in us to get away from danger. So when we feel anxiety, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. What it means is your body's signaling a cue of danger. What happens if we haven't been taught how to manage our anxiety growing up? Maybe we had anxious parents. Maybe we just weren't taught how emotional regulation systems. So what happens is we can get stuck in the anxiety and reinforce the anxiety. So in this space, you can feel agitated. We blame out. We tend to blame others. We get angry, panic, worry. So there's a few more there. We can feel vulnerable and weak and sensitive and frustrated at the same time. We find it difficult to sleep and difficult falling asleep. On the other side, you'll find I've got the fight-flight response. So we can feel subtleties of anxiety where it is a little bit of agitation and unease. And then we can go to the other scale where we feel a panic attack or rage, where we completely go offline. What I mean about being offline, and even when we're in this anxiety feeling space, our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that organizes our thoughts and where we kind of think logically, rationally, where we're solution-based and creative, it shuts down. And what comes on is our primitive brain, which is the limbic system. And this is where we feel everything. That's why anxiety so kind of you're feeling it in the system. It's emotionally based, because what is happening is your body's going into survival mode. So when I come back up here, you'll see at the top of the ladder, that's where we're social, connected, mindful, curious. And that's like generally, you might go on a holiday, you have no worries in the world, and you're feeling fantastic and light. And that's where your creativity can come in. But then something can happen. Maybe you're on your way home and your flight gets delayed or cancelled or something, and then you go into a bit of flight. That's a bit of an example. But what is happening when we go into those spaces? We're just not thinking as clearly. So the brain, there's different mechanisms that come on board. Now, how does this impact us in our everyday life? When we go into anxiety, our thoughts are very much connected to our anxious state. And if we believe those thoughts without realizing on a subconscious level, we reinforce the state, because we'll continue to do things that create that anxiety. I will get to it, but a good one of this is like, an example is I accidentally cancelled this event on Facebook, and my anxiety went up. I had this fear response, and I had the fix it mode come in. So generally when we're anxious, we want to fix it straight away to make us feel better. And so I fixed it as much as I could, it was a good mobilizer for me. So it created like a taking action. But what I wanted to do is not only fix it, I wanted to even go further in and make it even better and better. So I kind of went into like this work mode, but I knew it was happening. So I was able to say, once I finish fixing the event, I'm going to go outside and go for a walk, take my dog for a walk, and come out of that anxious state. Because there's any time that we try to do things from anxiety, it tends to turn out pretty negatively, because we are not thinking clearly in that state. We can feel the anxiety and be conscious of it and aware and move forward with it. But it's when we're sort of really kind of functioning from anxiety constantly in long periods of time, that's when it impacts us. There's normal amount of stress and anxiety, and then when we get stuck in it, where it has its big impact. So what do we feel in our body when we're anxious? This is something I really recommend people to start feeling into. When I feel anxious, what do I notice in my body? I notice my heart rate increasing, I'm perspiring, I'm trembling. This will be something different for everyone. Some people feel really heavy in the chest. Some people feel like their stomach gets knots in their stomach. Some people go to the toilet a lot and find that they can't keep, anything in. Tension in your neck and shoulders, in your eyes and your head. Anxiety tenses us up. So what we're actually doing is we're bracing for danger. So this is why it can have health conditions connected to it, because we're quite tense. And if we're going into the world, like say if I'm constantly typing on the computer all day and I'm all tense, that is having an impact on my health. So that's why staying in those anxious states can get work done, because many people can get a lot of work done in an anxious state, but it's not necessarily good for our body. Okay, so how does this, show up in our everyday life? So up here I've got anxiety. I guess people also get diagnosed with anxiety disorders, workaholism. So a lot of people who are coming to the retreat that I work at are in this place of burnout because they've been working so hard. CEOs, people that just have not sort of done the self-care. So if we are stuck in that, like working really long hours and not taking care of ourselves, we then go into a shutdown response and burnout. And it's quite an anxious state. So fix it. So examples of this is like if you constantly get emails and you can't not look at them and not reply to people. Like you have to even if it's like dinner time and you want to take some space away from the computer, but you're just like, no, I have to look at it, I have to send. So that's quite an anxious place to be, to not be able to leave it for the next day. ADHD, so that's also people who have like lots of energy, hard to focus, people who get diagnosed with that. I have learned working with them is that they have a very intense fear response, especially if they've got trauma growing up. And this could be more physical trauma, and fear-based parenting can cause that as well. Can't sit still, so lots of energy, can't focus, but also can't sit still. Adrenaline sports, addiction, a lot of the time, the flight response in anxiety, people drink to get away from the anxious feeling. So it's a flight response. So addiction can take us away from that anxiety. Keeping busy, little to no rest. So again, what would happen if I didn't rest and I was bored, or if I just sat still? What happens in my body? Usually stuff comes up if we are not used to just resting. Judging others is a really big signal to know that you're in an anxious state, and blaming others, and sort of, yeah, in that fear response. I've got fear of abandonment and being alone. That's very much in relationship space. So say if you're with someone and you're having a conflict, the fear response of abandonment will be really, you get a real heightened anxiety there, and you just want reassurance and them to sort of come closer. People with anxious attachment, I'll go into attachment theory another time, but anxious attachment really live in this anxiety fight-flight space, and people with more avoidant attachment live more in the shutdown space. Looking outside of self to get guidance, so we can constantly be searching for answers outside of us because we just don't trust our own decisions, mainly because we may have been making the decisions from an anxious state in the first place, to get away from something rather than to move towards something. Fear of stepping out of comfort, and I know that one of the questions was around fear of failure, so this is very much connected to that as well. Depending on how you were encouraged when you were young will really help you navigate this sort of stepping out of your comfort zone. If you weren't supported, encouraged in real healthy ways, then you'll find it difficult to step out of your comfort, even if you feel that anxiety. Or you might just get really anxious and still do it anyway, which is something that I've navigated. So and defensiveness. Anytime you might give someone feedback and they go into defending, that's an indicator that they're in a fight, flight, anxious place. Okay. So what activates our anxiety? I call it activation. You can call it trigger as well. Why I call it activation is because our nervous system becomes activated in that fight, flight response. So there's the environments that we are in. Examples of this is your home. What does your home look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like when you're in your home? Situations such as work. What's work like for you? What about when you're having a meeting at work? Or another situation can be public speaking. That's situational. And then there's people. Certain people may cause us to go into fight flight, or if we are in relationship with certain people, like parents can cause us to do this, partners, and also people where we just don't like them. Like there's qualities in them that we just don't like that activate this fear response in us. So those are three real main areas that you can bring into your life, in the sense of, okay, if the environments and situations and people activate my anxiety, then I can start to identify what certain environments, situations, and people activate this anxiety in me. One of the questions was around how do I manage that as well, and I will come back to, we'll do some coaching on this stuff. But the thing that I really recommend around anxiety is to get super curious about when it's happening, the patterns around it. Whenever I work with clients, I work with specific scenarios. What is it that person said that caused you to go into defend mode? What is it about your environment? So I have a friend who lives in a tiny home. So she bought a tiny home thinking, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to live in a tiny home. I'm going to heal from past relationships. And then she realized that the tiny home really did not support her well-being, and she became really anxious in her tiny home. So it's a good example of it wasn't aligned with her, even though on a on a logical level, she was like, this will work out, but her actual whole being just went into a fear response. And that was because of her past. There was a few things in her past that connected being in a tiny home and feeling not safe in a tiny home. So that's how your environment can impact you as well. These are things that if you would like me to send you these little questions too, I can do that. I've got a little cheat sheet as well that can support you, but getting really curious about the sensations, the feelings, the stories around it. And as we do a little bit of coaching, you'll understand this a little more too. So, what else is connected to this and how we feel anxious is, what are my needs that help me feel healthy in life? What are my values? So often we can have anxiety come up because we can have a conflicting value with maybe an organization we work in, maybe something that we're doing. We might have some sort of conflicting value there. Also needs, if our needs are not met in healthy ways, that will also cause us to feel anxiety. So an example of this is if people are escaping with alcohol and they're in the fight flight, then it's just going to be a surface level coping mechanism that helps them feel good for a moment, but then they will have the consequence of like the hangover the next day. So our needs, meeting them in healthy ways, in that way, like alcohol, using it as escapism. Maybe I feel lonely, so I drink. So the need there is connection. If I meet that need of connection and in a really healthy way, then I won't be using the coping mechanism. So obviously it's easier said than done, because the reason why we don't do this is because of our belief systems, our woundings, things that get in the way of us actually meeting those needs in healthy ways. That's just a bit of a cheat sheet that I can send you if you like. And yeah, it's about when you become activated, what can you do? Let's mute for a moment and I'll come back to you. So what we have here are common grounding tools. In order, if you know you're going through a stressful time, you need to amp up your grounding tools. So it will be things like nature, whatever grounds you specifically. But yeah, things like nature walks, journaling sometimes ground people, breath work or breathing techniques, co-regulation with someone that you love, you feel safe with. Co-regulation just means you're sharing nervous systems with someone that's calm. Yoga, walking, exercise. So this is where the self-care really needs to amp up for that stressful environment. Because things like that don't happen all the time, it's a bit of a different scenario. But if it's something like you want to still move forward with the work that you were doing and stepping out of your comfort zone, that's where you can get a coach, a therapist, someone that can help you with what's underneath the resistance and that fear response that's coming up that was so strong. You can look at what's underneath that, so then you can work with that, meet its needs, and then move forward. So because there's always like there's part of us that's resisting the process. We've got meditation, gardening. Meditation's a bit hard when you're really quite anxious, but something like gardening where you're moving, anything where you're kind of moving the body really supports your nervous system. Showers, hot or cold showers, they support you in different ways. And swimming and steam and plunge. So if there's ability to have a steam and plunge somewhere, that people have steam rooms and plunge into cold pools and things like that. That really supports the nervous system. Anything that calms your nervous system will be beneficial. If you're having a panic attack in itself, that's where you want to like slow the breathing down, open your eyes, touch to ground, and pat a pet or something like that. Just touching things is important, can be really important, but also keeping your eyes open. So what do you see, smell, touch, feel, that sort of thing, because you want to ground yourself back into the present moment. A panic attack takes us out of the present, and we feel really like we're going to die, or our body feels like it's somewhere else. It doesn't feel safe. So when we're having a panic attack, just keeping your eyes open and just look around and name. You can even name things, and that will start to bring you out of it. So why is it hard to support ourselves when we're anxious? That's where I speak into more of our belief systems, the way we cope with stress. It was created through our upbringing. So there will be different ways that we cope that may not actually connect well with our health and reducing the anxiety. This can be through our thinking, how we process emotions, how we treat ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, all sorts of things around that. So we can have some blockages around that. It's the same as creating healthy habits. As you said, you've done work in this and you do work in this. So it's, yeah, similar in creating healthy habits. So that's it. So that was what I was coming to. Yeah. So that. So we've got some questions that have come in. How is my anxiety my intuition? Now, your anxiety is your intuition, because anxiety is a fear response. And the fear response that we have is an innate, instinctive mechanism that we are born with. It's there for a reason. What happens is our early childhood experiences impact that the way that they impact the way that we sort of respond to that fear response. So the way we think about it, the way we behave, the way that we talk to ourselves when we get that fear response, all those things impact the way that we treat the fear response in itself. The fear response has wisdom. It's got information for you to listen to. It's just that the story that we have is not so intuitive. It's generally impacted by the past experiences of that filter. So that is how our anxiety is our intuition. It's just how we also think about it and creating space between the fear response and the story. I have another question that's come in, and that is, why do I keep continually repeating the same patterns? I can go along fine for a year or two and then fall back into old habits. Now, this is an important one, because what can happen is with our anxiety, we can use coping mechanisms, and they can also be healthy coping mechanisms to reduce the symptoms of it. So things like exercise, swimming, eating healthy, doing all these really nice things, going on holidays, doing different things, it can support our nervous system. But it's kind of like surface level. That is a way to maintain a holistic sort of life. But what we've also got to do is we need to process our emotions as well. So we've got to process why we get activated in the first place. We can often cover up that activation, but if our environment or situation or people around us are consistently activating us, then you've got to look at the activation and go underneath what is happening there. What are the belief systems? What are What is your experience with it? What are the unmet needs there? So you've got, yeah, the reason why it repeats itself and it's reoccurring, the challenge, is because it needs further emotional processing. Okay. If I know what is making me anxious, but I can't alter the cause, is there a way to reduce the symptoms? So yes, there's a way to reduce the symptoms, lots and lots of self-care, and also reassessing the situation as well. Can I change my environment, the people, the situation? If I can't and I have to work through it, then yes, a lot of self-care and grounding tools, super important. And how can I reduce anxiety connected to fear of failure, which blocks my natural flow of intuition? Now, the fear of failure is generally connected to how we were treated when we were younger and we failed when we were younger. How are we encouraged? How are we supported? What happened when we failed? How are we treated? And what is failure in the first place, right? What is classified as failing? Um, Generally, it would be what is your meaning behind it. So if I fail, what am I making that mean about myself? Often we can go into a shame spiral and we have connecting thoughts around how we're just not good enough, not enough, not smart enough, and it can make us feel really small and like we just shouldn't have done it in the first place. So I would become really clear about what does fear mean for you specifically. Not what does fear mean for you. What does fear of failure mean for you specifically? And how is it blocking you from your intuition? So is it because of the not getting the ability to regulate because you're going into a shutdown shame spiral, or you're becoming super anxious so you can't take, you can't move forward? Like, where is the fear of failure impacting your ability to step into your flow and intuition, and get to know those parts? So it will be, if you really get curious about it, you'll see a pattern. My biggest issue is the quick shift from anxiety to dissociation, and it happens before I realize it. It's only in hindsight that I'm like, okay, I just dissociated for 10 minutes, sometimes more. How can I realize before or while it's happening how to move through the anxiety and resistance from dissociation and exhaustion? It's a big question. So with that question, what I would say around that is dissociation is more of a shutdown response. Anxiety is happening first, so that's why it's on a ladder that I showed you earlier. So what happens is we become anxious, the fight flight response comes in, and then we shut down into a dissociative state. So becoming really aware of your process of when your fear response comes in. That's number one. When do I feel unease? What am I doing when I feel anxious in my body? What does anxiety feel like in my body? And then once you start to get to really know that part of you, then you might find, okay, the anxious state happens really quickly and then I dissociate, and that's why I can't catch it. Often if we can check in, so when do I dissociate? What am I doing? What activity am I doing? Where am I? Who am I with when this is happening? Get to know the patterns of that. And then you can then practice when you're in those environments, situations around those people, you can start to track yourself. Okay, I'm about to go meet up with so and so, and that's when I dissociate, or I'm about to have therapy, or I'm about to go home. Okay, that's a time when I dissociate. So, what am I feeling in my body knowing this? And becoming really clear on how you feel before you get to that dissociative state, because there will be a process to it, there will be a pattern there. So getting clear on that, and then can I change my environment? Can I see a therapist? What can I do to support myself in that? And I do highly recommend seeing a therapist for these questions, because you can go deeper into this and get to know why do reoccurring patterns happen? Also, why do I have the fear of failure? And getting to know it really deeply, understanding the wounding behind it, and understanding what the fear is and what the needs are. So I hope you enjoyed this masterclass, and I will see you all next week.